The gleaming metallic petals of Nexus Prime expanded outward like a cosmic flower in bloom, each of the 12 massive extensions reaching toward a different sector of space. From Jake Morrison's viewport in the Terran Federation shuttle, the space station resembled an impossibly intricate artifact, part sculpture, part engineering marvel, set against the backdrop of swirling nebula gases that marked the exact boundary between the 12 major species territories. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Lisa Harper stood beside him, her dark eyes reflecting the station's luminous exterior. 300 years of interstellar conflict, and this is the first time humanity has earned a seat at the table. Jake nodded, adjusting the collar of his diplomatic uniform. At 42, Ambassador Jake Morrison had spent 2 decades navigating Earth's complex political landscape, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of representing humanity in the first truly inclusive interstellar peace summit. "Magnificent and terrifying," he replied, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "The Xanthari and Hydran delegations have been fighting proxy wars for 3 centuries. Our species has barely been spacefaring for a fraction of that time." The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, and Jake gathered his thoughts. He had reviewed the briefings countless times. Earth Command had been clear. The Terran Federation's primary objective was to secure favorable trade routes by aligning with either the Xanthari Coalition or the Hydran Imperium, whichever offered better terms. Secondary diplomatic relationships could be established with the other 10 species. But Earth's fragile economic position in the galactic community demanded powerful allies. Lisa checked her datapad. "We have 2 hours before the welcome ceremony. The Acadian representative has requested an informal meeting." Jake nodded. "Perfect. They're neutral in the Xanthari-Hydran conflict. Good place to start testing the waters." As they disembarked, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that despite the station's beauty and the historic nature of the summit, something felt oddly performative about the entire affair. 300 years was a long time for an interstellar war to simmer without resolution. Either these species were remarkably stubborn, or something else was at play. The Acadian diplomat, with his translucent skin revealing a complex network of glowing veins, greeted Jake warmly. "Ambassador Morrison, welcome to Nexus Prime. Your species' inclusion marks a significant milestone." "Thank you, Emissary Vox. We're honored to participate." "You arrive at a critical juncture," the Acadian continued, his voice melodic through the translation device. "The Xanthari-Hydran conflict threatens to escalate once more. Your perspective as newcomers may prove enlightening." Jake noted the careful phrasing. "Has there been progress in previous summits?" The Acadian's inner lights pulsed slightly. "Progress is cyclical, but perhaps this time will be different." Something in the way the Acadian's inner lights dimmed told Jake there was more beneath those words than simple diplomatic pleasantry. The welcome ceremony was a dazzling display of interstellar diplomacy. Representatives from all 12 species gathered in the central chamber, a massive circular space with 12 equally spaced podiums arranged in a perfect circle. Jake studied each delegation carefully. The Xanthari, with their crystalline exoskeletons that refracted light in hypnotic patterns, occupied the position directly opposite the Hydran delegation, aquatic beings contained in hovering water spheres, equipped with multiple mechanical appendages. The ancient rivalry between them was palpable, crackling like static electricity across the chamber. Captain Roy Henderson, Earth's military advisor, leaned toward Jake. "The Xanthari control the nebula routes we need for expansion toward the galactic core, but the Hydran offer better weapons technology. Command is leaning toward the Xanthari, but they want your assessment before final instructions." Jake nodded, but said nothing. Something about the ritualistic positioning of the delegations, the formality of the proceedings, felt less like genuine negotiation and more like elaborate theater. Later that evening, as Jake reviewed the day's interactions in his quarters, His personal communication device chimed with a priority message from Earth Command. Ambassador Morrison, intelligence indicates Xanthari Hydron. Conflict will escalate within 48 hours. Casualties projected in billions. Secure alliance with either Xanthari or Hydron. Immediately to ensure human trade routes remain protected. Failure, not an option. Jake stared at the message, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. Something wasn't adding up. He turned to Lisa, who was analyzing the day's diplomatic exchanges. Lisa, pull up the archives of the previous 3 summit meetings. I want to see how they progressed and ultimately failed. Lisa raised an eyebrow but complied. Looking for patterns? Exactly. For hours, they pored over the records. Jake noticed something strange. The escalation points followed almost identical patterns across all 3 previous summits. The same accusations, the same dramatic walkouts, even similar language used by different representatives. It's like watching the same play with different actors, Jake muttered. Lisa nodded slowly. Almost as if the failure is predetermined. A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Patricia Wells, the xenobiology specialist assigned to their delegation, entered with a troubled expression. Ambassador, I've been analyzing the physiological responses of the delegates during today's session, she said, her voice low. The stress indicators don't match their rhetorical positions. Meaning? Meaning the Xanthari and Hydron representatives show lower stress levels when they're supposedly at their most confrontational. It's as if they're performing. Jake's suspicions deepened. Dr. Wells, I need you to discreetly monitor tomorrow's session. Record everything, micro-expressions, pheromone releases, vocal stress patterns, anything that might reveal discrepancies between what they're saying and what they're feeling. The next day brought the first formal negotiation session. Jake watched as the Xanthari and Hydron representatives exchanged rehearsed accusations, each more outrageous than the last. The other species delegates intervened predictably, offering compromises that were summarily rejected. During a recess, Roy Henderson cornered Jake in a private corridor. Command is getting impatient. Morrison, we need to declare our position. The Xanthari have offered exclusive mining rights in their territory if we support their security demands. And the Hydron? Advanced propulsion technology and weapon systems. Both offers expire at the conclusion of this summit. Jake nodded noncommittally. Tell Command I'm still evaluating our options. Henderson's jaw tightened. This isn't a request, Ambassador. It's an order. That night, Jake received another encrypted message, but this one hadn't come through official channels. The sender was anonymous, the content a simple string of code that, when decrypted, provided access to financial transaction records involving every delegation at the summit. Jake's blood ran cold as he scrolled through the data. Massive weapons contracts, resource exploitation agreements, insurance policies against war damages, all showing the same corporate entities benefiting, regardless of which side prevailed in the conflict. More disturbing still, many of the beneficiaries had representatives embedded within the delegations themselves. It's not just theater, Jake whispered to Lisa as they reviewed the evidence. It's business. Lisa's expression hardened. 300 years of managed conflict, billions dead to maintain profit margins. Jake nodded grimly. And now they want humanity to pick a side and join the game. On the third day, tensions in the central chamber reached their scripted breaking point. The Xanthari representative accused the Hydron of genetic warfare against border colonies. The Hydron countered with allegations of territorial violations. Other species took predictable sides. Roy Henderson slipped Jake a datapad with a direct message from Earth Command. Declare Terran support for Xanthari immediately. Final warning. Jake stood, and the chamber fell silent, all eyes turning to the human representative, preparing to make his historic declaration. Distinguished delegates, Jake began, his voice steady. For 3 centuries, Your civilizations have engaged in what you call the Long War. 12 summit meetings have failed to produce peace. Today, the Terran Federation was prepared to announce our alignment in this conflict. Murmurs of approval rippled through the chamber. However, Jake continued, before making that declaration, I felt it necessary to understand the true nature of the conflict. He activated the central holographic display, projecting the financial records he'd received. What you see before you are transaction records spanning the last 200 years. They show consistent patterns of investment in weapons manufacturing, reconstruction contracts, and territorial resource exploitation, all benefiting the same consortium of corporations with representatives embedded in every delegation in this room. Shocked gasps and angry protests erupted. The Xanthari representatives' crystalline form flashed with patterns of outrage. This is a violation of summit protocols. Such accusations are groundless. Jake continued calmly, displaying more data. The evidence suggests that this conflict has been deliberately perpetuated to maintain profitability for these interests. Peace talks are designed to fail on schedule, with new hostilities timed to maximize market returns. The chamber descended into chaos. Some delegates demanded Jake be removed. Others sat in stunned silence. Dr. Wells approached Jake, whispering, "The physiological responses are telling. Some are genuinely shocked. They didn't know. Others are showing clear indicators of guilt and fear of exposure." The Acadian representative stood. "Ambassador Morrison, these are serious allegations. What do you propose?" Jake looked around the chamber, meeting the gaze of each delegate. "I propose nothing. The Terran Federation will not choose sides in a manufactured conflict designed to generate profit at the expense of billions of lives." He stepped away from the podium. "We refuse to participate in this charade. When the 12 species are ready for genuine peace negotiations, Earth will return to the table. Until then, we withdraw." The silence that followed Jake's exit from the chamber was profound. Lisa and Dr. Wells followed, leaving Captain Henderson standing alone, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. 3 months later, Jake stood in the office of the Secretary General of the Terran Federation, watching a news hologram reporting on the unprecedented developments following humanity's dramatic withdrawal from the Nexus Prime Summit. 4 major corporations have been dissolved following investigations by a coalition of species. The reporter announced. The Xanthari Hydran Peace Accord, signed last week, has ended hostilities for the first time in 3 centuries. Most surprising of all, the remaining 10 species have requested human mediators for their own conflict resolutions, citing the need for external clarity. The Secretary General turned to Jake with a mix of admiration and exasperation. "You disobeyed direct orders, Morrison, by all rights. I should have you court-martialed." Jake nodded. "I understand, sir." "Instead, it seems I'm supposed to promote you. The Galactic Council, newly formed, I might add, has requested you personally lead what they're calling the Honest Peace Conference. Apparently, your willingness to walk away from the table has made you the most trusted diplomat in the galaxy." Jake allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes the most powerful negotiating tactic is being willing to stand up and walk away. The Secretary General shook his head with a rueful smile. "They're calling it the Morrison Doctrine now. Who would have thought that galactic peace would begin with one human refusing to play the game?" Outside the window, Earth gleamed blue and peaceful, newly central to a galactic community that was, for the first time in centuries, genuinely pursuing peace rather than the profitable illusion of it. Jake thought of the anonymous source who had sent him those financial records, someone inside the system who had wanted the truth to emerge. Sometimes, it took just one person willing to stand for truth to change everything. Sometimes, walking away was the first step toward a better future. As preparations began for the new peace conference, Jake knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. 3 centuries of managed conflict had created deep scars across dozens of worlds. But for the first time, there was genuine hope. Not the manufactured optimism of scripted negotiations, but the authentic possibility of a galaxy where cooperation replaced conflict, and truth prevailed over profit. And it had all begun because one human had the courage to stand up and walk away. The Nexus Prime station rotated slowly against the backdrop of stars, its 12 petals illuminated by the light of distant suns. In the 3 months since the dramatic collapse of the peace negotiations, the station had transformed from a stage for elaborate diplomatic theater into the bustling headquarters of the largest joint investigation in galactic history. Jake Morrison stood at the viewport of his temporary office, watching shuttles from a dozen worlds dock with the station. Each carried investigators, financial experts, and justice officers determined to unravel the vast conspiracy he had exposed. "Ambassador," Lisa Harper said, entering with a data pad. "The Zenthari delegation has arrived for the preliminary session." Jake nodded. "And the Hydron?" "Already settled in the East Wing. This is the first time their representatives have met face-to-face without corporate handlers present." The discovery that many diplomatic advisors had actually been corporate agents had shocked the galaxy's political establishment. Several prominent officials across multiple species had resigned in disgrace or faced criminal charges. "How are they adapting?" Jake asked. Lisa's expression softened slightly. "Awkwardly. 300 years of scripted animosity doesn't disappear overnight. But they're trying." Dr. Patricia Wells joined them, carrying complex biological scanning equipment. "Ambassador, I've completed the baseline physiological analysis of all delegates. We'll be able to monitor stress and deception markers throughout the negotiations." Jake frowned. "I'm not comfortable with that level of surveillance, Doctor." "It's not surveillance," she corrected. "Every delegation has requested it voluntarily. After centuries of manipulation, they want transparency. The scans will be publicly displayed in real time during all sessions." This was new. Species willing to have their emotional responses monitored to prove their sincerity. It spoke to how deeply the revelations had shaken galactic society. "Very well," Jake conceded. "But only with their continued consent." As they walked toward the conference room, Captain Roy Henderson approached, his military posture rigid with lingering disapproval. Despite his opposition to Jake's actions at the previous summit, Henderson had been retained as security advisor due to his expertise. "Ambassador," he acknowledged stiffly. "Perimeter security is in place. All delegates have been scanned for weapons and communication devices linked to non-governmental entities." "Thank you, Captain," Jake replied evenly. Their relationship remained professional but cool. Henderson had been following orders, just as Jake had been expected to do. The difference was that Jake had chosen conscience over compliance. The conference room bore little resemblance to the formal, theatrical central chamber. Gone were the raised podiums and dramatic lighting. Instead, a simple round table dominated the space, with identical chairs spaced evenly around it. No species was given prominence over another. As delegates filed in, Jake observed their interactions carefully. The Zenthari representative, Ambassador Crystal, approached the Hydron diplomat, Supreme Envoy Morrow, with visible hesitation. Supreme Envoy. Crystal's crystalline form shimmered with uncertainty. "My government wishes to express regret for the attack on Hydron Colony NS7 last year. We now understand it was orchestrated by third parties to prolong our conflict." Morrow's water sphere rippled, mechanical arms extending slightly. "My government has similar regrets regarding the Zenthari mining station in the Cygnus sector. It seems we have both been pawns in a larger game." The exchange was awkward but sincere, the first steps toward healing centuries of manufactured hatred. Jake called the session to order. "Representatives of the 12 species, we gather today, not for peace negotiations, but for truth-seeking. Before we can build lasting peace, we must understand the full extent of the deception that has kept us divided." He activated the central display, showing a complex network of corporate entities, financial transactions, and political connections. The joint investigation has identified the primary architects of the Long War. What began as legitimate conflict 3 centuries ago was gradually co-opted by commercial interests, who discovered that perpetual, controlled warfare was more profitable than either decisive victory or lasting peace. The Akkadian representative, Emissary Vox, leaned forward. How did they maintain this deception across so many worlds and species for so long? Lisa Harper stepped forward. Information control was key. Each species received carefully curated intelligence that reinforced existing biases. Diplomatic staff were selected for malleability or complicity. Peace summits were orchestrated to fail at precisely the right moment to justify renewed military spending. Dr. Wells added. There were also biological components. Several species were exposed to compounds that heightened aggression or fear responses during critical decision periods. This revelation caused visible distress among several delegates. The myriad representative, a collective consciousness controlling a swarm of small insectoid bodies, scattered briefly in agitation before reforming. We were biochemically manipulated, the myriad's harmonized voice asked. In some cases, yes, Dr. Wells confirmed gently. Particularly before major offensive operations or during previous peace summits. Jake watched the delegates absorb this information. The truth was painful, but necessary. The entities responsible operated across species boundaries, using shell corporations and proxy representatives. They created a system where war was predictable, profitable, and perpetual. The Xanthari ambassador's crystalline form darkened. Billions of our people have died in these conflicts. As have ours, the Hydran envoy added. For profit. Jake nodded grimly. The investigation continues, but we've identified 12 major corporate conglomerates as primary beneficiaries. Their combined war profits over 3 centuries would be enough to rebuild every damaged world 10 times over. The remainder of the session was devoted to sharing evidence, connecting dots across centuries of manipulation. Unlike previous diplomatic gatherings, this one had no secret agendas, no corporate handlers whispering instructions through concealed earpieces. The pain and anger in the room were real, but so was the determination to find truth. As the session concluded, the Akkadian emissary approached Jake. You have done something remarkable, Ambassador Morrison. You've created a space where truth has value. Jake shook his head. I merely refuse to participate in the deception. Sometimes, the Akkadian replied, inner lights pulsing thoughtfully. That is the most revolutionary act possible. Later that evening, Jake met with his team to review the day's progress. Lisa brought reports from each delegation's internal discussions, while Dr. Wells analyzed the physiological responses recorded during the session. The stress indicators were consistent with genuine emotional responses. Dr. Wells reported, no evidence of deception or performance. What about Captain Henderson? Jake asked. The captain had been unusually quiet during the proceedings. Lisa hesitated. He received 3 encrypted communications from Earth Command during the session. I couldn't access the content. Jake frowned. Earth's government had publicly supported his actions after the fact, especially once the economic benefits of being central to the new galactic order became apparent. But he knew some military and corporate factions back home had been displeased by his revelations. Keep an eye on him, Jake instructed, respectfully. The next morning brought a surprise visitor. A Hydraxian diplomat had arrived overnight. The Hydraxians, an enigmatic species from the galactic rim, had maintained strict isolation for centuries, observing but never participating in interstellar politics. Ambassador Morrison, the Hydraxian representative began, its voice resonating through a specialized translator. I am Observer Thalix. My species has monitored the Long War since its inception. We have compiled extensive records that may assist your investigation. Jake was stunned. "You've been watching all this time? Why come forward now?" The Hydraxian's multiple eyes blinked in sequence. "Because you did what no one has done in 300 years. You recognized the pattern and chose to break it. My government believes this represents a genuine opportunity for change." The Hydraxian records proved invaluable. Unlike the other species, they had no stake in the conflict and had documented events with clinical detachment. Their archives contained communication intercepts, financial transactions, and behavioral analyses spanning centuries. "This is the missing piece," Lisa whispered as they reviewed the data. "We can now connect every major escalation to specific financial transactions." Armed with this new evidence, Jake reconvened the conference. As delegates settled into their seats, Captain Henderson entered, flanked by two Terran security officers. "Ambassador Morrison," he announced formally. "I have received new instructions from Earth Command." The room tensed. Jake met Henderson's gaze steadily. "Proceed, Captain." Henderson straightened. "Earth Command has completed its own internal investigation into corporate influence within our government. 17 officials have been removed from positions of authority due to conflicts of interest." He paused. "I have been instructed to place myself under your direct command, with no external oversight, to ensure Terran participation remains free from compromised influence." The admission clearly cost Henderson his pride, but Jake recognized the integrity it required. He nodded respectfully. "Thank you, Captain. Your expertise remains valuable to this mission." With the Hydraxian evidence and Earth's renewed commitment, the conference gained momentum. Working groups formed to address different aspects of the conspiracy: financial trails, military manipulations, propaganda systems, and environmental impacts of prolonged conflict. Jake found himself working closely with Ambassador Crystal and Envoy Morrow. Despite centuries as enemies, the Zenthari and Hydron representatives discovered they had more in common than either had been led to believe. "Our scientific approaches are complementary," Crystal observed during a discussion of joint research initiatives. "Your aquatic adaptations solve problems our crystalline technologies struggle with." Morrow's mechanical appendages gestured enthusiastically. "And your energy manipulation capabilities would revolutionize our propulsion systems." "Imagine if we'd collaborated instead of fought for the past 3 centuries," Jake suggested quietly. The two representatives fell silent, contemplating the wasted potential, the advancements, discoveries, and lives lost to manufactured hatred. "We cannot reclaim the past," Morrow finally said. "But perhaps we can build something better for the future." As the investigation progressed, resistance emerged. 3 separate assassination attempts targeted key investigators. Mysterious system failures erased crucial evidence. Anonymous threats reached delegates, whose testimony implicated powerful figures. During a particularly tense session following the discovery of sabotaged evidence, Jake addressed the growing concern. "We always knew there would be resistance," he said calmly. "The entities we're exposing have accumulated power over centuries. They won't relinquish it without a fight." The myriad representative swarm formed a complex pattern. "Perhaps we should increase security measures? Limit information sharing?" Jake shook his head. "Secrecy and fear are their tools, not ours. We will continue with complete transparency. Every piece of evidence, every testimony, every conclusion will be publicly accessible across all 12 territories." "That's dangerous," Captain Henderson warned. "Yes," Jake agreed. "But the alternative, fighting shadows with shadows, leads back to where we started. The truth is our only weapon, and it only works in the light." His approach proved effective. As evidence spread across planetary networks, public outrage grew. Citizens of all species began demanding accountability from their governments. Corporate stock prices plummeted as consumers boycotted companies implicated in the conspiracy. Whistleblowers emerged from within the corrupt systems, offering new evidence in exchange for leniency. 6 months into the investigation, the first major trial began. Executives from Galactic Armaments Consolidated, a weapons manufacturer that had supplied all sides of the conflict for centuries, faced charges of war profiteering, conspiracy, and crimes against multiple species. Jake attended the opening of the proceedings, held in a neutral judicial facility constructed specifically for cross-species jurisprudence. The 12-member judicial panel included representatives from each affected species, including humanity. As the trial began, Lisa joined Jake in the observation gallery. "Did you ever imagine this when you walked out of that chamber 6 months ago?" Jake watched as the defendants were brought in, powerful figures who had once manipulated galactic events from the shadows, now facing the consequences of their actions in the full light of justice. "No," he admitted. "I just knew I couldn't be part of their game anymore." The trials were only the beginning. As the full extent of the conspiracy became clear, the 12 species formed a new interstellar governance structure, the Galactic Concordat, designed with transparent operations and powerful safeguards against corporate influence. Jake found himself increasingly drawn to the work of rebuilding rather than exposing. The border regions where Xanthari and Hydran territories met had suffered the most during the Long War. Entire planets lay devastated, ecosystems destroyed, populations displaced. With the conflict ended, reconstruction began. 1 year after Jake's dramatic exit from the original peace negotiations, he stood on the surface of Nexus 4, once a thriving agricultural world, now a scarred battlefield being reclaimed. Xanthari crystal smiths worked alongside Hydron hydro engineers, using their formerly competing technologies in harmony to restore the planet's damaged ecosystem. Lisa approached, her diplomatic uniform now bearing the insignia of the Concordat rather than the Terran Federation. "Earth Command wants you back home. They're creating a new position, Galactic Relations Director, and they want you to fill it." Jake looked out over the recovering landscape, where representatives of a dozen species worked together on restoration projects. "Tell them I'm needed here for now." "They expected you might say that," Lisa smiled. "They're willing to establish the office here, on Nexus Prime. You've become something of a symbol. Jake, the human who walked away, is how most species refer to you now." Jake chuckled. "There's some irony in becoming famous for walking away." "You didn't just walk away," Lisa corrected. "You walked toward something better. You just had to leave the old path to find it." As the first new crops began to emerge on Nexus 4, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The conspiracy had been vast, the corruption deep-rooted, the damage immense. And yet, change had begun with a single, simple act, one person refusing to participate in a broken system. The galaxy was healing, not quickly, not easily, but genuinely. Former enemies now collaborated, sharing knowledge and resources. Transparent governance replaced shadowy manipulation. Truth, however painful, had created the foundation for authentic progress. Dr. Wells joined them, carrying soil samples from the regeneration project. "The preliminary results are promising. The combined Xanthari Hydran approach is accelerating recovery far beyond our projections." "Collaboration usually does," Jake observed. As the sun set over the recovering world, Jake thought about the long path ahead. There would be setbacks, resistance, and new challenges. The 12 species had centuries of division to overcome, planets to heal, trust to rebuild. But standing there, watching former enemies work side by side to restore what had been destroyed, Jake felt something he hadn't expected when he first exposed the truth. Genuine hope. Not the manufactured optimism of corporate propaganda, but the authentic possibility of a better future built on truth and cooperation. Captain Henderson approached, his formerly rigid demeanor softened by months of working alongside the very aliens he had once viewed with suspicion. "Ambassador, the Concordat Council is assembled for the evening briefing." Jake nodded. "Let's not keep them waiting." As they walked toward the temporary headquarters, Henderson cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Morrison, I was wrong about you. Standing orders aren't always right orders. We were all part of a system larger than ourselves, Jake replied. The important thing is that we're building something better now. The council chamber housed representatives from all 12 species, now working together to coordinate the massive reconstruction efforts across formerly contested territories. As Jake entered, he was struck by how natural their cooperation now seemed. How quickly centuries of engineered hatred had given way to pragmatic collaboration once the architects of division had been removed. The Acadian representative acknowledged Jake's arrival. Ambassador Morrison, we were just discussing the proposal for an interspecies scientific exchange program. Your input would be valuable. As the session proceeded, Jake contributed where needed, but mostly observed with quiet satisfaction. The council no longer required his guidance at every turn. They had embraced the principles of transparency and cooperation, making them their own. Later that night, alone in his quarters, Jake received a message on a secure channel, the same anonymous source that had provided the initial financial evidence. The old order still has roots. Be vigilant. But know this: what you started cannot be stopped now. Truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Jake encrypted and archived the message. The source was right. There would be continued resistance, attempts to restore the profitable status quo of perpetual conflict. But something fundamental had shifted in the galactic consciousness. Species that had been manipulated into centuries of hatred were now experiencing the benefits of cooperation firsthand. He stepped to the window, looking out at the stars that no longer represented battle lines and contested territories, but possibilities. The peace wasn't perfect, the healing wasn't complete, but the direction was clear. All because one human had the courage to stand up and walk away from a table where truth had no seat. The next morning, as representatives from all 12 species gathered to continue their work, Jake felt a sense of completion. His role was changing from revelator to builder, from the one who exposed the lie to one of many creating something true. The galaxy was finding its way toward authentic peace, not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice, not the silencing of differences, but the celebration of diversity, not the profitable illusion of diplomacy, but the challenging reality of genuine cooperation. And it had all begun with a single, defiant step away from a table where only lies were being served.